this face?
This face? From Scott Derrickson, director of Sinister, one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and the first Doctor Strange, an MCU project that I think actually stands on its own quite well, comes actually a very personal passion project for him. The story behind this particular director is fascinating to me. So after directing the first Doctor Strange in 2016, he was set to direct the sequel around the same time that they were supposed to begin production, or at least pre-production. The director came into a fork where he had a script that he already wrote that he was really proud of, and so he had to make a hard decision to put focus on either adapting a short story into a feature of The Black Phone or working on Doctor Strange 2. He ultimately made what he considers to be the hardest decision that he ever made in his career by stepping away from Doctor Strange 2 because he just felt so much more passionate about this other particular project that he wanted to work on. These type of horror movies, you can say, are the roots of what got him discovered and goes back to his roots. More particular behind the scenes reasons was because it reflected a lot of what he dealt with growing up in an abusive slum area. Making this whole project was a form of therapy for him. And of course, the other thing that pushed him over the edge to step away from Doctor Strange 2 was, of course, Marvel executives were getting in the way of his own personal ideas that he wanted to have for Doctor Strange 2. He wanted it to be a lot more in the realm of horror, and he really wanted to push the concept even further, and he wanted to push it to really get violent and really get freaky weird. From the Marvel executives' point of view, I understand that not wanting to stretch your movies to rated R, so that way you can have a wider mass audience and you can sell more tickets to, of course, kids and just a younger audience all around. But it sucks for Scott because I do think that some of the best parts of Doctor Strange were some of the weird artsy stuff that we didn't see in any previous MCU movie at the time. And I think he could have really brought some real unique stuff when it came to a Doctor Strange sequel. By the end of the day, they picked Sam Raimi, a director who was also known for making horror movies with a definitive and a unique style of his own. But obviously, with the whole controversy of that movie is that it was pretty clear that Marvel executives got their hands on it. They kind of butchered and got in the way of what Sam Raimi would have wanted, I'm sure, 100%. In what was a very mixed reception of a movie, and want their movies and their filmmakers to abide by what they particularly want for their movie plan, which sucks in the case where they just bring in directors who are known for their unique styles. The big superpower of Marvel triumphs again by just crushing and destroying creativity, you can say, at least nowadays. Don't want to ignite the flame of the MCU fan base. I'm just saying it sucks that they're not allowing these creative and talented directors to do what they really want to do with these movies and concepts. Just saying, please don't attack. So with all of that, I do have a lot of respect for Scott in that regard. He basically went the opposite of the usual route, which is to chase a paycheck. I don't blame anybody for wanting to chase Disney money. In the case here, he definitely chose passion over paycheck. Even though the promotional trailers made this movie out to be just a generic jump scare fest, but in the case here, it pleasantly surprised me. It was a lot better than the trailers made it out to be. I'm really glad to see that it's not just a complete jump scare fest. Maybe a little. It's so hot in there. The Black Phone. Kidnappings of children in 1970s northern Denver leave many to be afraid of who is to be known as the Grabber. Once our protagonist finds himself captured in broad fucking daylight and trapped in a soundproof basement, he begins receiving calls from a mysterious disconnected black rotary phone from all the killer's previous victims. Based on a short story adapted into a feature, the simplistic storyline of a hero's escape is familiar, yet contains elements that are quite refreshing actually. Quite experimental, you can say. And also there are some raw elements here as well. The biggest faults for me were two things: the inconsistent performances from the child actors and the cheap jump scares. When you have a cast that is primarily children, your movie's immersion really depends on their line deliveries to come off as natural and not forced as possible. Unfortunately, there are a few moments where the supporting characters' lines just felt robotic, as if they just got done looking at their line off the script like seconds before rolling. Pretty minor, but it's still there to notice. As for the jump scares, they never got me. Not a single one. They were fairly predictable and tiresome. There were great makeup effects and visual effects to accompany them. If it weren't for the blaring sound effect in the theater, these visual spectacles would indeed creep me out. I had people screaming performing right next to me, literally right next to me, and I think their scream scared me more because I thought that they were having like a panic attack or something. They had me quite concerned for a second there. Those were about my gripes with the execution here. Everything else is fairly consistent. The performances between the main character and Ethan Hawke in particular were pretty gritty and conniving, you can say. The two performed off of each other so well, as if it's just like a big cat and mouse game between the two. You really find yourself rooting for the protagonist to get out of there and to escape triumphantly. The theme of standing up for yourself and those you care about when you are surrounded by brutish figures or abusive figures to that regard is simple but sweet, and is very reminiscent of many movies from that actual 1970s time era, you can say. It's truly an immersive experience, actually, for a movie to not lean into current world themes or current world problems, of course, but to stick with its actual era of what was the usual norm, you can say, back then. The production art and production design really encapsulated what it would have been like for a child to grow up in the slums of the southwestern United States, especially in the 1970s, you can say. In newspaper boys, old-fashioned TVs, remember when they were just big boxes, classic 1970s movie references, 1970s music, cocaine, etc. It's all here. The original soundtrack of digital upbeat music brings moments of levity in what is mostly, I would say, a very depressing and gloomy story. Part of me is curious to just see a cut or to see a version of the movie where we didn't have those moments of jarring pieces of music that would usually bring senses of joy or bring senses of optimism in moments where I didn't feel like it was appropriate, you can say. The moments of the movie that actually had me the most unsettled was the first act, because we established the main character's shitty home surroundings, an abusive drunk father, despicable bullies, and every single redeemable figure in his life that is looking out for him are all getting kidnapped and murdered. Again, I say one more time, all of these type of real life events that can and are happening on a consistent basis, I'm sure, around the world are just as more terrifying than, again, anything that is supernatural. However, there are indeed supernatural elements in the story that are the aspects of the movie that I do feel are quite experimental. It's more than just the voices of the previous children that help out Finn. Their actual spirits are still there, and we actually do see them manifest themselves, and actually interact and manipulate objects in the basement to aid Finn in helping him find ways to escape. It didn't overstay its welcome for me, actually, and so I was able to sustain my system of disbelief for sure. These ideas really just feel like concepts that I thought mainstream studios wouldn't approve due to it being too outlandish, or maybe they wouldn't think that audience members are smart enough, at least mainstream audience, to follow along with this sort of storytelling. I'm happy that this type of artsy storytelling is still present in big budget horror movies, and I highly encourage this to keep going, and for it to be not just once in a while sort of thing, but rather more consistent in horror movie makers. Now, here are the elements of the movie that had me just completely flabbergasted, completely confused, completely shooketh. 1. Motivations and backgrounds of the grabber. We didn't get anything too clear as to why he was kidnapping these certain kids, or why he even was a child kidnapper in the first place. They were sort of hinting that he was performing sexual misconducts against them, or was finding some sexual thrill out of it, but again, nothing was solidified, nor was something clarified for us, the audience, to figure out. We kind of had to piece that together, and we kind of had to interpret it as ourselves. So the way it comes off here in the movie came off pretty standard and generic. And 2, the supposed psychic abilities that the main character's sister had to aid the police in finding out which house the killer operated in. Holy moly, was this just kind of took me out of the movie there. It felt like there was little to no attempt to explain as to why Herb in particular was getting these abilities or getting these flashes in her dreams of seeing these killings take place. I just really just wanted more explanation out of it, but I didn't get it. Pity. Overall, I am surprised as to how decent the movie was, and it really outdid at least what the trailers made it seem to be. I encourage that for every filmmaker out there, to really make stuff and to really make content and tell stories that really hit home for you, because those are always going to be unforgettable experiences for yourself. Very excited to see what he does next. 7 out of 10. Classic escape story with experimental concepts that had me thrilled, besides the bits of unoriginal horror movie cliches.
I got some candy in my van. You want some?
Hell yeah.